The model we have currently is QE for banksters and QE for governments, essentially. It's financing their debt. It's transferring private debts off the banks to the public. Now, since the QE that we have, the QE that is modeled here in the UK, we had 375 billion pounds printed in QE. This has resulted in the top 5% seeing an increase in their wealth of 128,000 pounds. This has not resulted, however, in increased productivity, in increased investment, and increased wages.
But they're causing inflation in asset markets and deflation in the real world.
Yes.
We need it the other way around.
Yes.
Exactly. But they don't understand that their money printing is causing the deflation that they are trying to avoid.
Yeah.
You proposed in the Financial Times QE for the people. Tell us about it. What is QE for the people?
Well, QE for the people is not QE for the banks, which is the first thing I've got to get straight, because what the banks have been, what's been done with the modern QE is the central bank's been buying off the private banks, giving them cash in return for bonds, etc., which has inflated their free cash supply, and that's a huge part of where asset price bubbles have come from. But the only way that money's turned up in the real economy is when they go and buy the occasional Lamborghini, and the person who washes the car gets a certain amount of income from it. So the money's gone, as Michael Hudson put it beautifully, the helicopter's flown over Wall Street, not over Main Street.
So what would QE for the people, what would the UK look like right now today if they had taken that 375 billion pounds and given it to the people? How would the mechanism work according to your plan, and what would it look differently to today?
I've got a slight variation on the simple QE I'm saying, which actually use it to cancel a large part of the private debt in the public, that's stopping the public being able to invest, innovate, spend in general. So I'd be giving money in an equal sense to all households, so you'd be distributing that money throughout the economy, but if anybody who received it had debt, they would have to pay the debt down. And you'd use that to cancel part of the private debt that's actually encumbering society right now. On the other hand, if you weren't in debt, you would get a spending boost. So what you'd have is that 375 billion would have been a straight stimulus to the British economy, rather than being this totally indirect stimulus through the financial sector, which is supposed to work through the wealth effect. And when they do their research, there is no particular wealth effect. The main wealth effect comes out of housing, which is why we've seen the economy here growing, because of the housing bubble. The government's also been pumping up. But QE for the banks has been effectively useless in stimulating demand and reducing the private debt burden on the economy. This would be a direct way of both stimulating demand and getting rid of the debt burden. Not even thinking about it, but they're pumping up the asset values at the same time.
Right, but they don't have an incentive not to walk away from this because they own those assets. There's equilibrium that they believe exists at all times. There's this idea that everyone's rational, that economics flows and equilibrium is always present in the system. Prices are always what they should be. And the fact that if you flood the market with $1 trillion or 100 trillion more, it doesn't upset the fact that incentives and behavior and humans are going to do what they're going to do at a perfectly equilibrious state of perfection.
Yeah, but that's what they're afraid of upsetting. That's the tabernacle, you know. And when you talk about QE for the people, what you're actually saying is we're going to interfere with that real economy, that little model of yours. We're going to inject money into that. And they're afraid there because they've got this, first of all, the fear of disturbing what they think is perfection. Now, they can see the state of the economy, particularly in Europe, as perfection right now. I don't know, but they do, okay? And secondly, they're afraid of inflation. And this is the fear of causing inflation, when at the same time they're trying to cause it. They're trying to cause it through QE for the banks and saying, oh, inflation's down to zero now, or well, we just make people's inflationary expectations rise, etc., we can cause... They're getting nowhere. And Japan has been doing this for 25 years, also getting nowhere. We're saying, you need some inflation now. You want to reduce the value of debt by increasing the general price level. One way to do it is QE to the people. Oh my God, that could cause inflation. But they're not thinking outside and looking at the real economy and saying, hey, it's the real economy that's suffering. Let's do something direct. And that's what QE for the people is about. Do something directly to that economy